Hey, what's going on, Who That Nation? It is yours truly, TJ Jones, the host of the State of the Saints podcast. And I have a special guest with me from The Advocate and also from NOLA.com. We have Mr. Jeff Nowak. What's going on, Jeff?
Just living the dream in my house as I have been for the last 5 months. Longer hair than I'm used to, but, that's just part of the deal these days.
No cabin fever, huh? Do you have cabin fever yet?
I've had cabin fever. It's like beyond. I had cabin fever like 2 months ago, and now I'm just at the point that it's like I've just accepted my new state of very limited outside exposure. But I can't complain.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for being a part of the State of the Saints podcast to talk New Orleans Saints with us. I know a lot of people in the Who That Nation looking forward to hearing from you and hearing your perspective on the team, man. So thank you.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
First question, I want to just talk a little bit about training camp. I mean, the Saints have been padded up for about 4 days now, 4 days of training camp. There are a lot of guys standing out, a lot of guys that are surprisingly taking extra steps, especially people like P.J. Williams and Traquan Smith. I want to start with P.J. Williams because we talked off the air and we were talking about, a tweet that you put out about P.J. Williams and how, I'm paraphrasing this, how people kind of, I'm not paraphrasing. You say willing to drop the anvil on P.J. Williams. So I want to know, what do you think about P.J. Williams and his production and his development, especially in training camp right now?
PJ Rockstar Williams. Well, so I should mention that, you had Jeff Duncan on a few days ago, and he he said basically the same thing. It's very weird right now because normally I would be out there, and I focus a lot on digital content. I try to produce as much video as possible,
right.
But the way the training camp is set up right now with coronavirus restrictions, only 10 media members are allowed out there per day, which is one per media outlet, essentially.
Right.
And so our beat writer, Amy Just, has been out there all week. I know another of our beat writers, Luke Johnson's, I think, next up on the carousel, and you just kind of go through it. And we benefit. We're fortunate to have a pretty robust team covering the Saints, and other organizations, they don't have the luxury of not being able to go out there, if that makes sense.
Right.
But so a lot of what I've been able to assess has been from a distance. And it's obviously not ideal because the clips you're getting are the clips that are allowed to be shared by the media. There's a lot of situations where, they're running sets that they don't want filmed for obvious reasons.
Right.
And in a lot of situations, they'll allow you to film stuff if there are fans present, because they're not going to say, well, you can't film this, but the fans in the stands can, because they can't control that. So the restrictions are even dialed up a little bit more than usual. But I think that's probably the takeaway that I think people need to keep in mind is the clips that you're seeing are not team drills. They're one-on-one sets. And if I was a cornerback, I would be petitioning the league to stop allowing people to film even that, because it's such a brutal way to only see how cornerbacks are developing. So you mentioned this, the tweet I had the other day, and the reason I felt it was important to send that out was because, I sent out a tweet after the first day of camp, which was a clip that I shared to highlight Deontay Harris and just some of the development you've seen there in terms of how he gets off the line and his quick breaks in and out. Mm-hmm. And PJ was the unfortunate victim of that.
Yeah.
And it just showed just how quick Deontay Harris is. And PJ was the guy on coverage in that. And if you know anything about PJ, he's a slot corner, he's a nickel corner. He's not the guy you're going to match up on a shifty dude outside the numbers with no help.
Right.
So, you're asking for trouble. And, those are good reps for the corners, because they need to get those reps to be able to work on those skills. But it's just simply not what you have PJ there to do.
Yeah.
And so the clip I shared, I want to say it was yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. I'm losing track of the days for the last 5 months. But, the clip I shared yesterday, I wanted to share it because I think it's important to realize that PJ Williams, his best asset, in my opinion, is the ability to get up to the line and make tackles.
Yeah.
And to just stop people cold. And on that rep, And yes, I like to use flowery language, like dropping anvils on people. I grew up watching Looney Tunes.
Me too, man. Me too.
Yeah. And so why I shared that clip is because I think what you see there is a lot more indicative of what you're looking for with a guy like PJ Williams. He's matched up with Juwan Johnson. The dude is just a monster. There's been some talk about potentially switching him to tight end because he's 6'4", 240 or something like that. And so you're asking a guy, you know, is PJ Williams is 6 foot, you know, soaking wet, 200 pounds, you know, he's not a big dude, but he got up there and he jammed him and forced him out of his break. And when you're talking about timing routes in the NFL, which pretty much, you know, every NFL team is primarily timing quick option routes. And when you just jam up that timing for even a half second, it throws off. It can throw off the entire play. The Saints run a lot of these over/under sets where it's relying on a guy getting off the line and creating traffic in the middle of the field. Right. They use Michael Thomas for that constantly. And if you disrupt that, then both those routes are shot because it's built to create space because they're crossing at a certain point of the field. You know, and this is kind of a really long rambling explanation, but what you saw in that clip is what you need to see from PJ Williams. And it's why I think the criticism of your nickel corner is a little overblown because he can't hold up in man coverage on the outside with no safety.
Well, you know, Jeff, I mean, I agree with you when it comes to PJ Williams playing in the nickel. And I would actually say that PJ Williams is one of the best tacklers in the secondary. He's definitely better than Marcus Williams in that regard and several other corners. But I mean, when you put him on the outside, I mean, I often tell a joke that he almost single-handedly allowed Calvin Ridley to be offensive rookie of the year. That game when he played against the Falcons. But I mean, I just feel like the Saints could have really helped PJ Williams in his career if they would have converted him to safety earlier in his career, because I feel like he would be a much better safety than he would as a cornerback. And I feel like, I mean, he can still, you know, play in a nickel because, I mean, we see C.D. Deuce, C.J. Garner-Johnson, you know, he's a safety, but he plays in a nickel. And I feel like if they did that for P.J. Williams earlier, I mean, maybe he would have been much further along and probably have a little bit more respect from the Who Dat Nation than he does. But I do think he does a lot of good things, but I don't know if I would have signed him back for a year. I mean, that's just my personal assessment of it, just looking at him, you know what I'm saying, and what he's done. But nevertheless, I mean, I think that he's a really above average tackler, and I mean, he does some good things as well.
It's definitely fair. It's definitely fair. But one thing to keep in mind with PJ, and you're talking about transitioning him earlier in his career, and there has been talk about, you know, using him more at safety in the you know, heavy box looks where you close the middle of the field. Is he tore his hamstring his rookie season. He played 2 games his rookie season. One of them was the Giants game that was bananas, if you remember that one. Where I think they won 51-49 or something like that. It was the craziest game until last year when they played the craziest game against 49ers. But so when you talk about a guy who's like, okay, his rookie season, maybe you see what he can do and maybe you consider shifting him, but he tore his hamstring. And then you have the next season he comes back. You're worried about getting him on the field before you can even consider changing his position. So his second offseason is him getting back into the position where you can trust him to play at all. So you're basically talking about 2 seasons where, you know, would it have been ideal to maybe see what he could do at safety? Probably, but there's a lot more going on than that. And it's important to keep in mind too, at that point, the Saints really needed corners. They had Kenny Vaccaro and they were running Delvin Breaux out there. And I think Delvin Breaux had a really nice start to his career with the Saints, but he did not finish well and the injuries didn't help. So it's, you know, it's easy to look back in hindsight now, but the Saints are in a much different position now than they were 2 years ago in terms of the secondary. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore opened up a lot. You know, you have Janoris Jenkins in there now, who I think is a heck of a player, but he's definitely not a tackler. And, you know, I think that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is, you know, when you're talking about a team like the Saints who pays a lot of money at the skill positions, you know, Michael Thomas is the highest paid receiver in the NFL. Drew Brees is one of the highest paid quarterbacks. You're going to have to pay Alvin Kamara next or probably in the next few weeks. They're talking about a contract extension now. The idea that you're going to pay top dollar for your nickel corner, especially when you already had Patrick Robinson.
Yeah,
who, I think it's good to have a veteran guy in that group, but he has not played up to the contract they signed him to.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to say, okay, who do you go out and sign? The guy I like to comp PJ with is Chris Harris, because he's been, since 2012, 2013, one of the top nickel corners in the NFL. It's where he made his money.
Right.
And if you look at him this offseason, he signed he signed for 2 years, $17 million with the San Diego Chargers.
Right.
And that's far from his top, the top contract he signed. The Broncos broke the bank to keep him around,
right,
at least so far as corners are concerned. And, when you're looking at a guy who, and if you want to compare their stats, I sent out a tweet the other day where their stats last season were pretty standard. I mean, right. Chris Harris had better numbers, but you're paying Chris Harris for those numbers. Right. PJ is making $2 million on a 1-year sweetheart deal.
Right.
And I think when you're talking about a team that has as much depth as the Saints do, and you're really just trying to have consistency at those positions, I mean, being able to bring in a guy that you trust on a $2 million deal, it's hard to argue that that's not the right move.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that, especially like the circumstances that we're in, Jeff. I mean, COVID-19, no OTAs, no mini camp. I think the Saints did an outstanding job bringing familiar faces back, because one thing that some of these newer teams are going to have to deal with is chemistry. I mean, we hear about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and all of the talent that they have, but they're going to go through some growing pains because of the chemistry, not having opportunities to go out there and work together in some of these off-season activities. I mean, I don't care how Tom Brady puts a hoodie on in the middle of the night and goes to Gronk house. I mean, you're still going to have some growing pains, So I feel like the Saints did a good job, and I understand that. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I just feel like, no disrespect, but I just feel like with PJ Williams, I think that, you could have found somebody out there that probably could have been a little bit more productive than he was. And I do feel like he's a much better nickel corner than he is outside corner. I mean, that's without even saying. But me personally, I feel like they could have went in a different direction. But
it's definitely fair. It's just you look at it's like it. I get into it with people on Twitter because it's really easy to say, like, okay, let's do this. But it's like, give me an example. Who do you bring in? And this year is extra tough because they haven't been able to meet with any of these guys. And
right.
Look at the Bucs. They traded a 4th-round pick for a retired player just to have someone who knows how to play with Tom Brady. I mean, right. I don't think that, there's going to be a lot of hype around Gronk this year. I'm not buying it. I don't think you come off the couch and play elite level football. But I think that was more about continuity. It was getting another one in the room that understood how he calls plays, because it's when you join a new team, it's not only learning how to play. It's not only learning the playbook, it's like learning a different language a lot of the time. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing to watch with the Bucs is how do Mike Evans and Chris Godwin adjust to Tom Brady? Because you don't bring Tom Brady in and say, no, Tom, I know you've played with the Patriots your entire career, but you're going to learn our terminology. You're going to learn all this. Like, no. Right. You're going to have everyone else adjust to Tom. You're paying him $30 million. You didn't agree to that contract with like, yeah, come in here. You're gonna play the way we want. It's like, no, he's gonna play the way Tom wants because Tom wins Super Bowls.
Exactly.
And it's gonna be on Mike Evans to learn how to play with that. And this is a little different with the Saints because a lot of the positions that you're bringing in are on defense. That's where the biggest changes have been. And this is another thing I tweeted the other day, which is, the Saints are in a much better position than a lot of teams in terms of losing the preseason games. No one benefits from it, but some teams are hurt less, and teams like the Saints that have very little turnover are going to have an easier time getting over the hump. The position that I have the most, I don't want to say concern, but I think it's probably the biggest area that you're going to want to watch is linebacker.
Yeah.
At this, you AJ Klein left in free agency. You hope Alexander Anzalone can come back healthy and stay healthy, but he hasn't been able to do that, so it's tough to really bank on that. I'm blanking on his name. What's his name? They traded for him last year. He was hurt all last year. Kiko Alonso, right? Yeah. He's trying to get back, and he's another veteran, but you're probably going to be relying on a guy like Zach Bond or Caden Ellis in very significant rotational snaps at the very least at linebacker, and you're not going to be able to see Zach Bond in one real live snap before week 1. Caden Ellis had a good run in the preseason last year, and he played at least a handful of regular season snaps. So you have a little more, but he's another guy that he's coming off a significant injury, and you're not going to be able to see him in live reps. And that's going to be tough for the Saints. I thought it was really, the only significant offensive position that they changed that you worry about someone adapting is Emmanuel Sanders. And if you had to sign a wide receiver that has proven he can adjust to a new system, it's probably the one who literally got traded midseason and then went and played in the Super Bowl. So even on that front, I think they're in better shape. Adam Troutman is a guy that you look at, and I think in a regular, an alternate universe where we have a full preseason, he probably comes in week 1 ready to go, and you see a lot from him. I think what you're going to see instead is, they're going to work him in a lot more slowly. The interesting thing that's going on right now, and I'm an eternal optimist when it comes to this sort of thing. Andrews Pete got hurt. He's hopefully going to be back in the next few weeks. That was the report. He had another hand injury, but it's not going to be the type that keeps him out for more than a couple of weeks. Josh Hill is dealing with Sean Payton's special. They call it a tweak. Like Alvin Kamara last year, he tweaked his knee. And while you hate to see those guys get hurt, you have 2 of the 4 draft picks they made. Hell, 3, if you count Tommy Stevens, are people that need extra time in the preseason to get up to speed in Adam Troutman, Tommy Stevens, who they converted to tight end, and Cesar Ruiz at either center or guard. He's been doing a lot of work at guard right now. But the talk is they're going to switch out in the next week or the week after. He's going to be taking a lot more snaps at center and getting a lot more work at center. But we know without Pete or Hill out there, they're able to get a little more significant work than they would. So you don't want to, like I said, I'm an eternal optimist. And I always look for the silver lining in things. And I think, if that had to happen, I think that it at least allows them to get a little more top level snap work than they would have otherwise. So.
And also, I look at it from a transactional standpoint as well. Like, let's just say, for example, teams don't have preseason games to actually look at some of these players. I mean, they have to rely on some of these organizations to send them film on these players. And when you look at the offensive line position, I mean, you look at guys like Cameron Time, Will Clapp, so many guys that probably going to end up getting lost in the shuffle. There's a strong possibility they could possibly leave the Saints and go somewhere else and be a starter right away. And it's because, of the rotation. No Andrews Pete, Nick Easton is in there, so it gives these guys an opportunity, guys that probably will be standing on the sidelines with their hands on their hips because a starter is actually in. So it's giving them opportunity to put some things on film that if teams are willing to show other teams, it can possibly make some other squad. But I want to backtrack on something that you said. You talked about the linebackers and probably preseason games would have helped them actually evaluate some of that talent. Not only do you feel like that, but do you feel like it is going to affect the way that they actually make tackles? Like, the thing about it is you don't want to get any of your best players hurt, right? So, I mean, you're not practicing elite tackling in practice. So do you think that tackling may be an issue when you're going into week 1 against the Buccaneers?
Well, so that's an interesting point you bring up. And I will say that the Saints have a lot of veteran players on defense. And I think that they won't be as affected by that as a team that, the Vikings drafted 15 players. That's not an exaggeration. They literally drafted 15 players. And several of those were the Saints picks. Right. And I think, I don't know if this was the plan at the time, but in hindsight, you don't have the time to evaluate those guys. You don't have preseason games to evaluate those guys. And I think they are very, there was some criticism at the time they didn't make enough picks. I think they're very, very satisfied with the picks they made. Right. And they already are going to have a lot of roster decisions to make. But in terms of tackling, you still have Demario Davis, who, in my opinion, is one of the top tacklers in the NFL, at least form-wise. And if you needed someone to bring along a young group of linebackers, I don't know if there's a better guy out there that you'd want to kind of lead that group. The other thing is, and we wrote a story about this yesterday, Amy Just wrote a story about that the Saints are actually incorporating more live tackling into their scrimmages because of exactly what you were talking about. They don't have the preseason games to work on that, so they're going to do it in practice. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of. It's not going to be the vicious hits that you might see in a game, but it's honestly, I think that might be more productive in terms of learning how to tackle. One of the things that as you watch the NFL over the last 10 years and the last 20 years, a lot of players just don't know how to tackle anymore. And and part of that is because there's a lot less time to practice, and it's just not something, you're trying to teach a team a playbook, you're trying to install a system, and it's like you're going to just trust that they already know how to tackle, and that's going to be the last thing you work on. But this year, without the preseason games, you actually have more practice time because you're not worried about travel. You're not worried about recovery after games. You're going to deal with recovery after practice, but that's a much different type of recovery. Right. And so you're going to have a little more time to work on that kind of stuff. So, there's a chance that there's a reasonable chance that tackling is an issue, but there's also a reasonable chance that they're actually are better off than they would have been otherwise, because in preseason games, when you have a lot, like 12 guys competing for one roster spot, everyone's trying to make the play. Everyone's trying to shine. They're not necessarily worried about, okay, I'm going to make a fundamental tackle right now.
Right. You're just trying to stand out.
Right, exactly. And you don't stand out with fundamentals. You stand out with, the strip fumble return for a touchdown. Right. Not to say that these guys aren't doing their jobs, but it's just kind of something you have to consider, and it goes both ways.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right when it comes to Demario Davis. I think he's a really good tackler, and then you got to add Nigel Branham in there as well, a guy that was a kind of a standout for the Philadelphia Eagles, man. Jim Schwartz, the defensive coordinator, used to rely on him heavily in that defense. So I think that he could be one of those guys that can come in and actually contribute. Now, I don't know how. Maybe he might start out on special teams and transition to the starting rotation, but I can really see him as one of those guys that come in and can contribute when he starts to get more familiar with the defense. Also, I want to talk to you about Alvin Kamara. You mentioned him about his contract, negotiations are starting to, perk up just a tad bit. He wasn't healthy. I mean, it was pretty clear last season he wasn't healthy. But, I mean, he still managed to get his normal 81 catches. Yes. I mean, and 1,300 all-purpose yards. So
I will say, but before we go any further, that is one of the most incredible statistics I've ever seen in sports. Alvin Kamara has caught exactly 81 catches in all 3 seasons.
All 3 seasons.
If you were trying to do that, it would be difficult.
Right.
That's insane. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. But that's so wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, you can't plan it. You just can't. But
at least not until week 17. You'd be like, okay, I need 3. But I don't know. That's so strange.
I mean, if it was incentive based and he had to get that amount, then,
right? He has an escalator at 80 and a half catches.
Exactly. I'll be excited about that. But I mean,
we should check the over unders. We should check the Vegas over unders if he's betting on himself at 80. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, I guarantee you he made more money. I just look at Alvin Kamara as one of those guys. I say he played at 73% and still had a respectable year, probably a better year than some other guys had that played all 16 games. But now he comes in. I mean, he's 100% healthy. I mean, he looks bigger. He looks a little bit more stronger. The way that from what I see from pictures and him running and everything like that, it seems like the explosiveness is back. What are your thoughts on Alvin Kamara, and what do you think about him over the last few years in the Saints uniform? And do you think he can, even exceed the expectations that we have for him as Saints fans and the Saints as an organization?
Yeah, so Alvin's tough, and when I say that, I mean tough in several ways. One being, it's tough to know what to expect from him this season, just because we're not going to get a chance to see him in the preseason. But right. And he's also tough in the fact that he, to use his own words, tore up his knee last year and missed 2 weeks. Right. It was reported that it was a torn MCL, which they never confirmed that. They never said which knee. Right. But if that's the case, I spoke with a doctor His name's Rand McLean. He's a sports medicine expert, whatever you want to call him. I don't even know his real title. I have to look it up. But he's great, and he kind of walked me through the kind of rehab process that you would have for that. And he said, at any level, so a grade 1 MCL tear is what you would call a sprain. And so he said that the timetable that he would give anybody, whether you're an NFL athlete or me sitting at my couch at home, is 6 weeks. Easily 6 weeks before he would recommend that you should be on a field. And Alvin Kamara, he missed. So he played against the Jaguars. He finished the game, and then he missed the next 2, and then there was a bye week. So it was essentially three and a half weeks before he was back on the field. And, just from that timetable, the fact that he was able to come back and play at a level that, I don't think that anyone's going to fool themselves into thinking that the Alvin Kamara who finished the season was the same one that started it. Right. But he was still a top 10 NFL running back, even in as limited as he was. I think that's very telling to the toughness, and I think you look at some of these weird, crazy balance drills he does. I think that probably played a role. But I think that he is very eager to show that he's back. And I'm honestly, you never want to hear that someone's injured, but a lot of the narratives that were flying around, and I dive into the deep Twitter holes a lot of the time, and there was this weird idea that he didn't enjoy football anymore.
Man, get out! Get out!
Like that Mark Ingram left, and he just wasn't having a good time. Right. And I think part of that was driven by the fact that he would, he'd get tackled for a 2-yard loss, and he wouldn't get pissed off. He would get up and run back to the huddle, and that's, if you know anything about Kamara, it's that's just him. Right. And I think that there was a lot of frustration there in that he knew he wasn't 100%, and he was doing what he could. And you can imagine how frustrating that is, even especially someone as competitive as Alvin Kamara. But whether they get the contract done before the season starts or if it lags into the season or after it, I think that he's more than motivated to show that he's that the last 8 games was not what he has to offer. Right. As fully healthy. And I mean, you just need to look at the first 5 from last season to really see that he led the NFL in broken tackles. He had 29 broken tackles first 5 weeks. He had 11 broken tackles against the Cowboys. Wow. 11. He had 8 the week before. So if you do the math there, that's 19 broken tackles. When he came back in week 10 against the Falcons, from week 10 to week 17, he had 19 broken tackles over the rest of his games. And I think that's the only number you need to look at. Yeah. But I expect big things out of him. I expect, especially, once they can incorporate Adam Troutman and they can run some really, really difficult to cover 12 sets out of the 12 formation with Cook and Troutman, and you don't know which guy's going to stay and which guy's going to go, whether they're both going to go. My dream is to have a 13 formation with no wide receiver and you go 5 wide. The math makes sense there, I think. And you put Taysom Hill, you have 3 tight ends on the field. Call it 23. You have 3 tight ends on the field, 2 running backs, Taysom Hill at quarterback. You send everyone out and you see what they do.
That'll be one heck of a play. I tell you that. I know it wouldn't be something they'll be prepared for. I tell you. So,
right. They'll have their goal line defense on the field.
Right. That'll definitely keep a defensive coordinator up all night.
Right. And the fact that they can do that, that's what makes the Saints roster so unique. Is you could feasibly do that. And have a mobile quarterback. So you don't the issue with going 5 wide with Breeze, and he does it so successfully, is in spite of the fact that he's not that mobile. Yeah. But yeah.
I mean, I think about some of the exotic plays the Saints have had. I remember one play when they played against Minnesota when they had all 3 quarterbacks on the field at the same time, and they had Bridgewater, and he made Mike Zimmer call a timeout because he was like, what are they doing? So right. I mean, Sean Payton will try to find ways to confuse you from time to time. So, I mean, I don't know. You might have put something into his ear, you know. I mean, especially.
I guarantee you that there's nothing I could come up with that Sean Payton hasn't already scribbled on a napkin somewhere. The play that I look at in that is in that Vikings playoff game. I don't know if the play you're describing is from the preseason game or not, because they did play in the preseason. I can't recall.
It was week 8. It was week 8 of, I think, the 2018 season.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't this past season. All right.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
But the play I look at is the playoff game against the Vikings. So the way they started the season running the Taysom Hill sets is they would split Breeze out as a wide receiver, which I hate. You know, I get the idea, and you don't want to tip the defense off by sending out Taysom Hill and no Drew Brees, because that just says, okay, that we can say Taysom Hill's a quarterback, and that kind of chops the playbook in half in terms of what you're defending. Whereas if you send both of those guys out there, they have to account for the fact that Taysom Hill could line up at tight end, he could line up at the H, he could line up in the backfield as a tailback, he could line up as a fullback, he could line up as a wide receiver, he could line up as you get where I'm going. When you take him off the field, you don't have that. But what you do when you put Breeze out wide is you cut off that entire half of the field, because Drew Brees is not running a route. So they don't even have to account for him. All they have to do is spy him with a deep safety, just so he doesn't have like a free 20 yards to just catch a pass and step out of bounds. That's the only time I could even envision them throwing a pass to Drew Brees. And even then, I think that they would think twice about it. But what they did in the Vikings game, and they did it a little more toward the end of the season, is they ran a play out of a heavy formation with Deontay Harris as the deep. He was running a post route. He's running an 8, and it was I can't remember who ran the option, but it was a run set, and they sent Taysom Hill, and he just chucked it deep for a 50-yard gain. And the reason that worked is because you can do so many things out of these formations that they just don't have to do a lot of the time. And they keep things in their back pocket that if you ran them in any play or any game this season, it probably gets you a 50-yard gain for a touchdown. I think that play I think Harris fell and he got tackled at the 1. But the Saints I guarantee you there's stuff scribbled in the back of Sean Payton's mind that he saves for big games. And I think that was one of them. And I enjoyed that. That's one of my favorite plays from the Saints this season, because you can watch it, and if they cover Deontay Harris over the top, Taysom Hill has 40 yards of green grass in front of him. He probably scores. If they play soft to stay on top of Deontay Harris and cover and actually account for that run, just hand it to Kamara and he gets a 20-yard gain. Anyway, I'm just waxing poetic about one play, but I really did enjoy it.
I mean,
go back and watch it. It's worth the rewatch.
I mean, I enjoyed it too, Jeff. And honestly, it could have easily been a touchdown. You know, I feel like Taysom Hill kind of threw the ball a little shorter, and Deontay Harris actually had to turn around and catch the ball. So if he would have put it out there a little bit further, he would have scored easily.
It's a little guy. He's tough to. It's like Dustin Pedroia when he was batting. It's like his strike zone's like 4 feet or like 4 inches wide. You got to get it to him. I think that honestly, like to me, it's like the fact that he hit a 5'7" wide receiver 50 yards down the field is amazing in general. But great concentration by Harris. I mean, those were two defenders right there. You know, he could have easily allowed that to distract him and not catch the ball. So I mean, it's a good play, good concentration by him. So I want to talk to you about the tight ends. You talked about Adam Troutman just a few minutes ago also. But Jared Cook, he's going into his second year with the New Orleans Saints. I think Dan Campbell, the tight ends coach, talked a little bit about Jared Cook, talked about how he's a little bit more comfortable with the offense, and he's more comfortable, with his role, and thinking about possibly expanding it. What do you think about Jared Cook, and do you see him as being even more effective this year than he was last year? Well, I don't know about more effective in terms of he did an incredible amount of work when they opened up the offense a bit and really target him down the field. What is important to remember about last season, and I think that it's pretty easy to spot when you kind of go game by game, is you just can't run a lot of the sets that you were planning to run or that you have built in when your quarterback goes down week 2. Right. Traquan Smith also got hurt in that game.
Yep.
So from week 3 on, you have a backup quarterback. You lose your I consider Traquan a slot receiver. He would play outside, but Ted Ginn was the number 2. So, right. But you lose that guy that you were expecting to be in the slot, and all of a sudden you have Austin Carr out there running. And, he got a lot of snaps. He didn't get a lot of catches. I don't know if he got any, to be honest with you, but he was out there a lot. And you also, and with that, you lose the ability to run Taysom Hill out there on offense for 20 snaps because you might need him in an emergency quarterback situation if Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt. Right. So from week 3 through Brees came back week 9 week 8 against the Cardinals. They had a bye the next week. So from weeks 3 to 7, the offense was just compressed down at pretty much as possible. So that's why you saw a lot of low scoring games. You saw them win 12-10 against the Cowboys. They won 13-6 against the Jaguars. And as Teddy Bridgewater get a little more comfortable, he opened it up a bit. Jared Cook caught his first touchdown week 6 against the Bucs. But then he got hurt. So it's like you look at a season that the offense was just trying to account for all of these variables. And then week 10, finally, you're able to run the offense that you plan to run from the start of the season. Right. And Jared Cook had a solid game against the Texans. He didn't have a great game, but he had a couple of nice plays. And then if you go through, I mapped out every single play of 20, or I want to say 15 yards or more. It was 15 yards or more that Jared Cook caught last season. He had 24 of those plays, plus one really terrible offensive pass interference call against the Panthers. And so if you look at his percentage of big plays compared to his total targets, he had 65 targets. He had 24 what I call explosive plays. So plays of 15 yards or more. That's 37% of his plays were 15 yards or more down the field. You can compare that to Travis Kelce, 136 targets, 34 explosive plays, so 25%. Right. Darren Waller's another guy, 117 targets, 29 explosive plays. George Kittle, 107 targets, probably the best tight end in the NFL. 25 plays, explosive plays. So those are the only 3 guys that had more explosive plays. But you look at the guys, these are the guys that had more targets. Zach Ertz, 135. Hunter Henry, who missed part of the season, 76 targets. Austin Hooper had 97 targets, and he got hurt week 10 and didn't come back. Tyler Higbee, 89 targets. Dallas Goedert, 87 targets. So like at the rate that he's getting targeted, the amount of explosive plays that he's producing is beyond elite. It's terrifyingly elite. And his yards after the catch were incredible too. He had to play against the Titans that I think he had 40, 50 yak yards down the sideline, which most tight ends don't get that far. They can't get that far because they're big and slow.
That good block by Alvin Kamara. That was another one.
So I don't know if he's going to be, more explosive than that. I don't know if you can be, but I think that with, barring another season of crazy unforeseen injuries, thankfully the Saints don't play a team with Aaron Donald on it. I think that he can, you extrapolate, I hate using that word, but you extrapolate that out and you're talking about a guy who very easily, he had what I don't even know. He had 65 targets. If you put that out to a very reasonable 100 targets, which, a tight end of Jared Cook's caliber should be getting 100 targets in a season. You're talking about 1,000-yard, 10 touchdown guy. So, I expect big things out of him. And especially in year 2, he understands the system. It's not changing. All the key players are back. If anything, they have just another guy in Emmanuel Sanders who can open up the field for him. You look at the 49ers game specifically, and the Saints scored 46 points in that game. They might have scored 80 if Jared Cook had played the entire game because they just had no answer for him.
2 receptions, 2 touchdowns.
Long touchdowns, too.
That tells you everything you need to know.
Right. The second one was a broken play. The first one, they were, I think they were in a cover 4, and the strong safety thought that he could bluff pressure and still I don't know if the strong safety thought it the play call. I don't know. But the safety just couldn't drop fast enough. Jared Cook was past him before he could even get remotely close to the zone he's supposed to be in to stop exactly that route. It was just a standard over. And by the time that Jared Cook caught it, there was no one there, and he gets ahead of steam, and good luck.
Yeah, he's dangerous. I mean, I think we both can agree with that. And some of the passes he catch, like he's fearless. Like I know there's a lot of players that will be making business decisions, and some of the catches that he made last season. I mean, whether it's in traffic, rather two guys.
It helps when you're a giant,
I mean,
literal giant.
I mean, I think about that. I think about that pass that Drew Brees threw to him. I think it may have been week 17, and he caught it like with one hand or something, like over Eric Reed. I'm
for
like,
a touchdown.
Wow. Yeah, I'm like,
yeah, I think Eric Reed deserves a Medal of Honor from the Panthers for what he did in those games. You know, they lost both those games, but he took a pounding. Especially in the Week 12 game. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Saints just beat him to death. With Jared Cook. At one point, he like limped off the field. I think he had 13 tackles or something like that because they were just throwing it to Cook, and he was just like, "Good luck. Let's see if you can tackle him." It was brutal, but you know, he was a good sport about it, I think, because who was it a few years ago that quit at halftime? I think he was
Vontae Davis.
I'm honestly, I went when I was going back through that game, I was like, it's honestly a miracle he didn't just quit at halftime like Vontae Davis, because man. Brutal.
Yeah, I mean, but that, like you said, that's what Jared Cook brings. I mean, that big frame when he's about 6'6", 6'7". You know, I mean, that's a big guy out there, you know, catching these passes. And I mean, a great, huge catch radius. I mean, he's incredible. And I expect big things out of him. Like you said, at the beginning of the season, I mean, he started off, he was dealing with some injuries. But this is a guy, you know, I mean, he led the Oakland Raiders in receptions at tight end and yards. So, this is a guy that when the Saints got him, I mean, I was really, really excited. And I'm also excited about, Alvin Kamara, being back at 100%. But I want to talk to you, last question is about the running game. We've been talking about the passing game throughout the show, but what about the running game? You know, what can the Saints do to improve their running game? You know, maybe get a little bit more carries out of Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara. Well,
so they also added Ty Montgomery, who I think is going to be a really useful asset. I imagine he's going to stick around. There's been this question of whether he'll take Latavius Murray's job. They play completely different roles in the offense. I don't think that's not going to be something that you know, that's actually a consideration in terms of like, oh, should we keep this guy over this guy? But what Ty Montgomery brings is an elite pass catching running back, you know, and you have that in Kamara, but it's a different style. Kamara is much bigger back. He's much more bruising back. And what you have in Ty is a guy that you can split basically anywhere, and he can press the defense. I mean, he's a wide receiver. He wears 88.
Right.
It always confuses me when I see him in the backfield with the 88. It's like, Dez, is that that's not there anyway. But no, I mean, the Saints are interesting because the Saints don't run a lot of traditional running back plays. They run a lot of crack toss plays where you're taking advantage of Michael Thomas's size to block the edge, which very few NFL wide receivers can do, or B are willing to do as well as he does. That's something that no one talks about as much as they should, is how good Michael Thomas is as a blocker.
Oh, I know. I mean, all you got to do is ask Sendejo from the Minnesota Vikings.
Right.
I mean, when in that divisional round game back in 2017, I mean,
he's a truck. Yeah. and especially, and as much as the Saints like to get out on the edge with their runs, he's a huge part of the running game. I mean, he's catching every pass thrown his way, and he's setting records, but like I won't say he's more important in the running game, but he's equally as important into the success of those outside runs.
Yeah.
Latavius Murray is interesting. I as you look back and you really wish that they had used him more towards the end of the season, especially as it became more and more apparent that Kamara just wasn't his full form. He was not at 100%.
Right.
And hindsight's 2020, but I think it's one of those situations where you have a stud running back, and if he is hurting, you don't want the defense to know that. And if you start giving him 50% of the snaps that you normally would, they're going to key on him. They're going to know that when he's in the game, he's getting the ball, that sort of thing. And that's not where you want to be. And so much of the Saints offense is predicated on not being predictable.
Yeah, Jeff, I want to say this. Like, I really didn't understand the logic on rushing Alvin Kamara back. Like you talked about it, about the time frame for an injury like that, like 6 weeks, right? I mean, it wasn't
that's
from
a doctor. Well. That's not from an NFL team. So I don't want it to sound like they were just throwing caution to the wind and sending him back. I don't know. They haven't said that, so I do want to make that clear. I'm just what the doctor told me is that's what he would recommend in that situation. So you don't know how severe this injury was. It might have been a situation where it was undetermined until he was able to get an MRI after the season, so I wanted to not make it sound like I'm suggesting that they were not keeping Alvin Kamara's best interest in mind when they brought him back. And I mean, missing 3 weeks of a 16 or, 2 games of a 16 game season is significant.
Right.
And this is a guy who is a very fierce competitor and wants to get on the field. And if he says he can go and you believe him and the doctors don't veto that, then I don't know. And it's tough because at that point you're coming off a bye week. Most injuries, you get 3 weeks to recover and you should be back on the field.
Yeah. I mean, but I just think, but I do just think about, they knew, they knew that he wasn't the same. I mean, he even said it in a press conference. He's talked about like how they had to push him and say, come on. We know you're dealing with something, but come on. I'm like, but the thing about it is, Jeff, Latavius Murray ran for 100 yards in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks that Alvin Kamara was gone, he ran for 109 against the Bears. No, 112 with the Bears and 109 with the Cardinals. So I'm like, you have a guy that is doing a really good job. So it's not like one of them situations where you have to rush a guy back. I mean, I just felt like maybe they could have held him out, a little bit longer. I mean, that's just me,
And I mean, hindsight is 2020 in that. And I will say that he got a far lesser share of the snaps in that Falcons game than he did the rest of the season. So I think part of it is bringing Kamara back. Mm-hmm. They also brought Drew Brees back before the timetable that, was initially set for him. And that worked out, so it's not always a situation where it works out that way. Mm-hmm. He actually, and when he came back in that Falcons game, I think if you go back and watch the tape, you'll see a guy who showed a lot of burst. I think that he looked really good in that game. He looked like a guy who was ready to play. Right. And as the season went on, I think it just wore on him. Yeah. And there's only so much you can do. It's tough though, because you do train these guys to be warriors. Mm-hmm. And they're hearing from we talk about people just trashing PJ Williams, mm-hmm. As Alvin Kamara sits out, he's not getting it. It's easy to say it now when you're the guy sitting there for a 4th week, especially as the Saints lose week 10 and you're not there against the Falcons. It's a much different situation mid-season when you feel like you can go, even if you're not 100%. Mm-hmm. And it's tough, and because you're kind of trying to balance these two ideologies of, rub some dirt on it and get back out there. And, I want to sign a $40-50 million contract in a couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing that we all have to respect in a Who Dat Nation too, Jeff, is the fact that, I mean, he could have easily re-aggravated something and it could have cost himself a lot of money. It could have been like one of those situations. Him being a team first guy. I mean, even if you didn't have respect for Alvin Kamara in the beginning, you definitely got to have a certain level of respect for him now. The guy that would put his team before, his contractual, situation. So, I mean, I got a lot of respect for Alvin Kamara for that. But I do feel like the Saints, they got Latavius Murray. I always say this. I feel like Latavius Murray has always been like the bridesmaid, never the bride on every team he went to. And I feel like he has the tools to really carry a team. We've seen it in Oakland. In some cases we've seen it in Minnesota. He He was dominating in that game in the divisional round against the Saints, in 2017. He does some really good things. So I just feel like if his number is called, I mean, he does answer the call. I mean, look at that game against the Houston Texans. I think he may have like about 10 or 12 carries, and he took advantage of it. I mean, he sprung for like a 30-yard touchdown. So Latavius Murray, to me, I feel like the Saints need to utilize him more. And I do understand he's not the best pass-catching running back. I mean, I think he caught his first touchdown receiving against the Cardinals in his career. But I do think he does some really good things that the Saints need to utilize. And he's a big physical guy. I mean, 6'1", 6'2", 225 pounds. Like, why? I mean, this guy leans forward, he gives you 3 yards. So,
I agree. I agree with you. I really like Latavius Murray as a back. I think a lot of what you saw last year, and this kind of goes back to my point where they really weren't running the offense they were built to run a lot of the season. And when you talk about wanting to get a guy like Kamara back, it's because they wanted to get back to the offense that they think is capable of winning a championship. Yeah. And while it's like, Latavius Murray played incredibly well against the Bears. Like I said, that's not the offense that the Saints predicated their winning strategy on.
That's true.
So
that's true.
You're running different sets, and I think that there was I think there's probably a middle ground from what you saw versus what could have happened. But I really like Latavius Murray. I've liked Latavius Murray since he showed up in Oakland and just ran over people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And I think another thing that we need to consider when it comes to the running game is it's really hard to run up the middle when your offensive line is not not creating space and getting leverage. And there was, the Twitter overreactions are always funny to me. And I knew the second I heard Cesar Ruiz that it was going to be this uproar, because anytime it's not a sexy position. Interior lineman isn't a sexy position, especially given the fact that he's listed as a center and they just drafted a center. But I think that was, I went through the 49ers game yesterday a little bit, and there's like 4 or 5 plays in that game alone where you're just like, man, they need interior line help. And whether he plays at center and you shift McCoy over to guard or vice versa, getting a top flight prospect to help shore up the line is super important, not only for Breeze, but what does Latavius Murray do well? Yeah. He's running between the tackles. And the more you're able to build that offensive line, the better chance you have of actually succeeding running between the tackles.
True. I mean, that's true. I mean, I was in that number, that was upset about the C. Ruiz pick, I mean, I guess, but to me, I guess I had my heart set on like Jordan Love, and I just thought like the Saints would probably go in that direction by drafting Jordan Love. Kind of fell into like those articles that was going on at the Senior Bowl.
I try to warn people every year that you're not going to be happy with what Sean Payton does in the draft. Every year, no one, it's like he's going to draft Marcus Davenport. He's going to draft Ryan Ramczyk. It's just what he does, and more often than not, it's a good pick, and he ends up getting Alvin Kamara in the 3rd round, or Michael Thomas in the 2nd round, or Marcus Colston in the 7th. So it's like you should probably. It's like people get so worked up about that 1st round pick, but with the Saints, it's almost always more about the later round picks.
Yeah. They've done an outstanding job. I mean, Jeff Ireland, I say this on the show a lot. I said they need to hide him out in a basement somewhere to make sure that nobody can find him, because to me, he's going to be somebody's GM one day, and it's going to be a dark day in New Orleans. I mean, the way that this guy and his scout team get these guys and find these diamonds in the rough the way that he has. I still feel like the 2017 draft was the greatest draft class in NFL history. I mean, I think you have to go back. It could be,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, you might look back in 5 years and that's not even a question.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to go back to like way back in the day. I think in the 50s with the Detroit Lions, that you have a offensive and the defensive rookie of the year. I mean, first team all pros, Pro Bowlers. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, just hit on every particular draft pick. I mean, and all of them contribute in a certain way. Like, I mean, from Azzaloni, from Marcus Williams. I mean, the list goes on and on at the talent in 2017.
Trey Hendrickson was in that draft too.
Yeah. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, everybody on it that the Saints picked up in that draft contributed in some way. And you can think about how they brought something to the team. I mean, Trey Hendrickson for the first 2 weeks of the season last year, he was leading the team in sacks.
He's a very solid rotational player. He's not going to be a starter, but those are the guys you need to draft to have a successful team. The only drafted for the Saints that you could probably put up there and make an argument for is the I can't remember what year it was, whatever year, Reggie Bush and Marcus Colston. So it was before the Super Bowl,
2006, yeah.
And it's just because the bookend of Reggie Bush and Marcus Colston is so good. Like just having one guy at the front and one guy at the back, and then just that was an incredible draft. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, every time I look back at that draft, it's like they got Marcus Williams.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, and even I can't think the offensive lineman that end up going to the Patriots and having a solid Nikovich. I think they drafted him right in 2006. I think he ended up being an offensive line for the Patriots.
That sounds right. Yeah. And the other guy they got in the mid rounds, defensive lineman, played for the Bears for a while. He made the Pro Bowl with the Bears. I can't remember his name. But
you talking about back in 06, or are you talking about more recent than that?
I honestly couldn't remember my jumped out.
I just remember Akeem Hicks.
That's who I'm thinking of. Akeem Hicks. Yeah. Exactly who I'm thinking of. Yeah, out of Regina. University of Regina.
Yeah.
I remember getting a kick out of him because I grew up a Giants fan. I'm from New England originally, and I wanted the Giants to draft him so they could have Akeem Hicks and Hakeem Nicks because they already had Mario Manningham and Eli Manning.
And ironically, the Saints had both of those guys at one time, right? So, but Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of the State of the Saints podcast. Thank you for coming and sharing your insight and breaking it down, the X's and the O's with us. But before you go, just let us know how we can get in touch with you, and also, tell everyone about your podcast and all type of other outside ventures you got going on.
Yeah, sure. So my title is digital sports producer for NOLA.com, which is just kind of a title that means nothing, but also means I do a little bit of everything. So unlike, so the difference between me and a beat writer, one of the differences, other than the fact that I am not as good of a writer and reporter as them, is so I don't follow the Saints so much as I follow the seasons. So when during last year, for instance, I followed around LSU, and I was out in Atlanta for the SEC championship and the Peach Bowl, and I was at the national championship, and then the season ended, and I came and covered I'm fully credentialed to cover the Pelicans. And so myself and our Pelicans beat writer, we host a podcast called Birdwatch. It's a Pelicans podcast. We just put up a post this morning on the draft lottery. They didn't get number one, in case you weren't paying attention. So yeah, if you're a Pelicans fan, you got a lot of Saints fans listening here, but if you're also a Pelicans fan, check that out. We just started this season, but we're having a good time. We're growing it, so that's fun. What I've been doing primarily for Saints camp is I've been cutting together a lot of highlight videos from the footage that's been shared with us from Fox 8 so far, because only so many people can get out there. They're allowing us to kind of co-post those videos, which I think is really good, because
that's cool.
Normally you'd have 1,000 people out at each practice, and this time around that's just not the case. So I think it's really helpful to be able to get people some real footage, because they just can't get out there. But then on the personal side, I host a podcast about nothing really, but it's called Running It Back. It's a movie podcast where we don't really review the movies. We just watch a bunch of sports movies and talk about the sports in them. Like we try to decide whether Bobby Boucher is actually the best football player of all time. He got 16 sacks in a single game. How did he not win the Heisman that year?
I don't know.
And then we kind of talk about stuff like Forrest Gump. We talked about sports Forrest Gump, where how good was Forrest Gump a good football player? Because I don't think he was, but he did.
A good special teams player.
He was good enough that the Alabama fans had to come up with a coordinated chant to get him to stop from running through the back of the end zone. How many times did he have to do that before you got the entire crowd to coordinate?
Yeah, good point.
We just did an episode on Cool Runnings, and we co-hosted it with a Olympics podcast to talk about how occasionally true the story was, because it's based on a true story, but it's like 99% fake. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, it's a good time. And if you want to check it out, You can it's my pinned tweet right now is the Cool Runnings episode,
Right.
and you can find that at twitter.com at Jeff_Nowak. That's Nowak. And yeah, any rate review if you have a good time, subscribe, and it's a lot of fun. I co-host it with a comic friend of mine from LA, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, looking forward to checking out that podcast. I seen you post it on your Twitter page, so definitely going to take a look at that. Jeff Nowak, thank you so much for being a part of the State of the Saints podcast, and we definitely got to do this again.
Yeah, man, TJ, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, take care, man. This is the State of the Saints podcast. Once again, Mr. Jeff Nowak. Thank you.